Most people don't remember the moment they found their calling. But I do. I was 10 years old, sitting in the hallway of Ridgeview General, legs swinging off a too-tall bench, while my grandfather fought for his life on the operating table. A nurse had handed me an apple juice and a dog-eared highlights magazine, but I ignored both. Instead, I clutched a battered children's anatomy book I'd brought from home, one I'd practically memorized. As doctors rushed in and out of swinging double doors, I studied their every move like it was choreography. When the surgeon finally emerged hours later, tall, calm, commanding, I stared at him like he was some kind of white-coated superhero. He spoke softly to my mother, then gave me a brief smile. That was it. That one look was all it took. I turned to my parents in the car ride home and declared, "I want to be a trauma surgeon." My father chuckled from the driver's seat without taking his eyes off the road. "That's a big dream, Carrie." In the back seat beside me, my sister Alicia, 2 years younger and already used to being the center of every room, piped up, "I want to be famous." "Well, you've got the charm for it," my mom said, reaching back to squeeze Alicia's knee. Then she looked at me. "And Carrie, maybe you'd like nursing? That's more your speed." More my speed. That phrase followed me like a ghost for the next 2 decades. In the Bernard household, success was measured in noise, sparkle, and charm, none of which I possessed in abundance. Alicia was born with glitter in her veins. She could sing, she could twirl, and she could light up a room before she could spell her name. I was the girl who read encyclopedias for fun and collected scalpels from toy doctor kits. At school, I excelled quietly. My test scores were perfect, my homework meticulous. At home, I was tolerated, encouraged to be more social, smile more, and not spend so much time in the garage with frog dissections. Meanwhile, Alicia received standing ovations for existing. When she got a B in pre-algebra, my parents took her out for ice cream to celebrate her turnaround. When I got straight A's in a science fair ribbon, my mom said, "Good job," while checking the oven timer. I learned early that I'd have to applaud for myself. And I did silently often. Every chapter finished, every formula memorized, every anatomy diagram labeled to perfection. I clapped inside, where no one could steal the satisfaction from me. The first adult to ever take me seriously was Mr. Lucian. He was my 7th grade science teacher. Tall, soft-spoken, with permanently ink-stained fingers and a collection of anatomical models that lined the classroom windowsills like trophies. He noticed me staying after class one day, bent over a microscope slide with such intensity, one didn't hear the bell ring. "You've got sharp eyes, Bernard," he said, peering over my shoulder. "And a steady hand. Ever thought about medicine?" I blinked. "Yes. Trauma surgery." Instead of laughing like most grown-ups did, he just nodded. "Ambitious. Good." From that moment on, he became my quiet champion. He lent me books far beyond grade level. Books about vascular systems, surgical suturing, case studies. He taught me how to question, analyze, and prepare. Most importantly, he treated me like someone capable. "You're going to change lives one day, Carrie," he said after writing my high school recommendation. "Remember that when people try to convince you otherwise." He was the first person to say it. He wouldn't be the last. But for a long time, I'd be the only one who believed it. At home, my acceptance into Halderman University's pre-med program was met with a shrug and a worried glance at the bank account. "That's not cheap," my father said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Maybe community college would be safer to start?" "It's what I want," I said, holding out the acceptance letter like a badge of honor. "And I got a scholarship." "That helps," my mother muttered, though her tone said it didn't help enough. Alicia, then 16, was on a teen fashion magazine's back page modeling earrings from a boutique her friend's mom owned. "You'll be great," she said airily, flipping her hair. Though honestly, I don't get why anyone would want to be in a hospital all day. It wasn't her fault, not entirely. She was raised on applause. I was raised on caution signs. They paid the difference after my scholarship. But each tuition check came with advice I didn't ask for. Most pre-meds drop out, my dad reminded me in phone calls. "Have a backup plan. Don't burn yourself out," my mom added. "Maybe you'll find something else along the way." Every call, every holiday, every dinner, I was reminded that I was walking a path no one around me believed I could finish. So I stopped sharing. I learned to wear my ambition like armor, quiet, impenetrable, and best kept hidden. The night before I left for Halderman, I sat on the back porch, legs tucked under me, gazing at the stars. The same stars I used to watch with Grandpa before his heart gave out. I remembered the surgeon's face. Calm, focused, capable. I made myself a promise under that sky. Someday, I will be undeniable. Someday, they'll have to see me for who I really am. I just didn't know how long I'd have to wait. There's a strange loneliness that comes with building something no one around you believes in. Like laying bricks in a forest while everyone else gathers at bonfires. Laughing, drinking, snapping pictures of smoke and flames. That's how college felt. Halderman University was a beautiful storm of brains and burnout. Everyone moved fast, thought faster, and slept as little as possible. The first semester weeded out the tourists from the lifers. I stayed. I stayed through organic chemistry, 3 a.m. labs, failed dating attempts, and panic attacks in the library basement. I stayed because Mr. Lucian was right. I had sharp eyes and a steady hand. And I wasn't here for applause. I was here for the craft. Other students treated medicine like a competition. I treated it like a promise I made when I was 10 years old, and no one clapped. I called home every Sunday out of obligation, not affection. The conversations were always short, routine, and careful. How's school? Busy. Still want to do this doctor thing? Yes. You sound tired. I did sound tired. Because I was. But it was a good tired. A purposeful one. Like aching after climbing a mountain. If you're enjoying the story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It won't cost you anything, but it will mean the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video. Alicia, meanwhile, was thriving in a different kind of world. She'd started a lifestyle blog with pastel filters, handwritten captions, and photos of her in vintage skirts sipping espresso. She gained followers fast, posting makeup tutorials and monologues about manifesting your best self. Our parents were obsessed. They brought up her brand in every conversation. She's getting an influencer deal with a local boutique, my mom said proudly one Thanksgiving. You should take some photos in your lab coat, Carrie. People love that behind-the-scenes stuff. I'm not doing this for clicks, I said. My father laughed. You need to lighten up. So I smiled, bit my tongue, and passed the stuffing. The deeper I went into my studies, the more I understood just how much pressure the human body can withstand, and how little the same could be said for family bonds. Second year came with new challenges. Cadaver lab, clinical rotations, back-to-back exams. I made flashcards in the shower. Ate peanut butter straight from the jar between classes. I got an apartment with 2 other med students who functioned more like caffeine-dependent ghosts than roommates. And still, I didn't quit. One evening, after successfully assisting in an emergency intubation during a simulation lab, I called home. I was excited, breathless. I got it, I said. I did the procedure clean, first try. Dr. Singh said my form was textbook perfect. Silence. Then, well, don't get cocky, my dad said. Plenty of students shine early and burn out later. Just pace yourself. My chest tightened. I mumbled something about needing to study and hung up. That night, I started keeping a journal. A place to write down the wins no one else wanted to celebrate. A place to remember that I was building something real, one clean incision at a time. The thing about Alicia is that she's not a villain. Not really. She didn't ask to be the favorite. She didn't invent the pedestal our parents placed her on. But she stood on it willingly. And sometimes she looked down at me from it and said things she didn't realize would echo for years. Like the time she visited campus during my 3rd year and wrinkled her nose at my shared apartment. This is where future doctors live? It smells like ramen and despair. Or the Christmas she handed me a copy of How to Dress Like a Girl Boss with a wink. Figured you could use a little polish. She meant it playfully. But I was already fighting daily battles in the ER, juggling shift rotations and barely sleeping. That gift felt like a jab at everything I had sacrificed to be taken seriously. So I smiled, always smiled, and turned back to my textbooks. By the time I graduated med school at 25, I'd performed more hands-on trauma interventions than most of my peers. I had letters of recommendation that used words like calm under fire, precise, and exceptional under pressure. I secured a residency spot in emergency medicine at Brookfield Medical Center, one of the toughest and busiest hospitals in the region. But at my graduation party, thrown by a few classmates at a dive bar near campus, only 2 people from my family came. My uncle, who clapped me on the back and said, "Still can't believe you're a doctor now," and Alicia, who arrived late, posted a picture with me holding my diploma and left 10 minutes later to attend a brunch downtown. When I called home the next day, my mom said, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Alicia told us you looked a little pale in that photo. Are you taking care of yourself?" That was the call that made something in me go silent. I stopped offering updates after that. If they asked, I gave one-word answers. I let them believe I was doing okay. I no longer tried to explain the intensity of what I was learning, or the night shifts, or the adrenaline highs and crushing lows of trauma care. I stopped inviting them into my world, because they never really wanted in. They just wanted it to look neat from the outside. The first time I held someone's heart in my hands, I wasn't scared. It was in my 2nd year of residency. A car crash victim, 28 years old. Chest collapsed from impact. We cracked his sternum open, and I helped the surgeon clamp the bleeders. My fingers were inside his body, steady, sure. The team moved in harmony, a ballet of precision and urgency. And I didn't flinch. That night, I didn't tell a soul in my family. I wrote about it in my journal, closed the pages, and set my alarm for the next shift. Because this was mine. Every bloody inch of it. Every exhausted triumph. And I no longer needed their applause to know it was real. By the time Alicia got engaged, I had already lost count of how many chest tubes I'd inserted, how many patients I'd cracked open, how many nights I'd spent catching sleep in a break room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like mosquitoes that never die. So when the ivory invitation with gold script arrived in my mailbox, Alicia Bernard and Miles Trenton, engagement celebration, I almost threw it away. Almost. But guilt is a stubborn parasite. It doesn't respond to reason. And no matter how far I ran into the clean, clinical world of trauma medicine, some part of me still responded to our family's dysfunction with, well, maybe this time it'll be different. It wasn't. The dinner was held in a rented ballroom at the Elmrose Country Club, Alicia's latest favorite aesthetic. Gatsby meets Instagram. Candlelight flickered across wine glasses. Tall floral centerpieces blocked half the faces at the table. And everywhere I looked, there were people laughing, drinking, clapping. People who had never once stayed up 36 hours to keep someone alive. I walked in 5 minutes late, fresh off a delayed flight and a near-miss consult. My hair was clean but damp. I wore a navy dress that hadn't seen daylight in years. I was barely seated when my father clinked his glass and waved for attention. "This here," he said, gesturing toward me with a wine-stained smile, "is our other daughter, the doctor." He chuckled, as if the title were part of a running family joke. Alicia beamed. Her fiancé, Miles, rose to make a toast. "To building empires," he said, holding up his champagne. "To knowing what you want and going after it." He kissed Alicia's hand. "To clarity." Everyone clapped. I sipped my water. Then my mother leaned in, smiling at the table but speaking to me. Maybe Carrie will finally settle down and join the real world too. I felt the glass in my hand tighten. The real world. As if the trauma bay didn't count. As if saving someone's life wasn't grounded enough. I swallowed my frustration like another bitter pill and stared into the candlelight until my vision blurred. That night, back at Alicia's house where I was awkwardly staying in the guest room with paisley sheets and a stack of unread bridal magazines on the nightstand, she poked her head in. "You always seem so tired, Care," she said gently. "Are you even happy?" I didn't know how to answer that. Not in the language Alicia understood. She spoke in aesthetics and engagement metrics. My vocabulary was blood pressure and blunt force trauma. "I'm doing what I love," I said finally. She tilted her head. "But does it love you back?" I stared at her, my beautiful golden sister. Her face scrubbed clean of makeup, glowing with the certainty of being adored her whole life. For a moment, I almost envied her. Then I remembered the buzz of the trauma pager, the rush of adrenaline when the doors fly open and someone's life is in your hands. And I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, even if no one else saw it. 2 days later, I was back at Brookfield Medical Center, standing over a 19-year-old boy with a stab wound to the lower abdomen. His name was Daniel. He was pale, frightened, and bleeding fast. "Let's prep for surgery," I told the nurse, examining his vitals. As they moved around me, he looked up and whispered, "Dr. Bernard, you don't remember me, do you?" I paused, squinting. "I was in Mr. Lucian's class. You came back once. Career day. Told us about how you got here." A chill spread over my arms. I remembered that day, how awkward I felt standing in front of rows of squirmy 7th graders, wondering if any of it mattered. "You said it's okay to be quiet, that some people build silently." He gave a weak smile. "I didn't think I'd make it out of high school. But I did. And now," he winced in pain, "now I really hope I make it through this." "You will," I told him, pressing his hand. "You will." And he did. That night, as I scrubbed out and stared at my reflection in the locker room mirror, I thought about the boy's words. About Mr. Lucian. About career day. About all the days in between where I thought I was invisible. And I realized something simple but profound. I didn't need my family to understand me. I needed to remember why I started. I didn't become a trauma surgeon for their praise. I became one because there's something holy in the chaos. Something sacred in fighting to keep someone breathing when everything's trying to shut them down. 3 months later, the department made it official. Carrie Bernard, MD, trauma consultant, Brookfield Medical Center. One of the youngest in hospital history. My attending handed me the certificate with a grin. "You're intense," she said, "but you're brilliant. And this place needs both." The hospital threw a small reception in the break room. Donuts. Applause. A few heartfelt speeches. I didn't invite anyone from home. It wasn't spite. It was peace. They didn't get to take credit for this. Not after the way they'd made me shrink for years, until I became someone they could ignore. But I didn't disappear. I sharpened. And now they'd have to squint to catch up. It started like any other day. A full board of cases, 3 surgeries scheduled before noon, and 2 coffee cups deep before sunrise. The trauma pager had buzzed twice already. Car accident, seizure, both stable. And I was mid-consult when my assistant interrupted the room. "Dr. Bernard, there's an emergency call." "It's personal." I excused myself, heart ticking faster than I liked. The hallway was quiet. The call wasn't. "Carrie," my mother's voice came through sharp and fast. "It's Alicia." The words hit harder than I expected. She collapsed. "The ambulance is taking her to St. Emery's. They said something about her blood pressure. She's pregnant, you know that, right? Please come." I barely remember grabbing my coat or getting to the other hospital. What I do remember, vividly, is walking into Alicia's room and seeing my sister pale, breathless, and scared for the first time in her charmed life. My father stood rigid by the window, his jaw locked. My mother clutched Alicia's hand like it was the only thing holding her together. No one looked at me when I entered. No one said thank you. I stood quietly by the bed, reviewing her chart. Preeclampsia, elevated blood pressure, swelling, headaches, all the warning signs. "I can help coordinate," I said calmly. "If they need a consult from trauma or cardio." "We've already spoken to the doctor," my father cut in. "She'll be in soon." "I'm not here to overstep," I said. "I'm here to help." He nodded absently. "Just don't get in the way." So I sat in the corner, like a visitor. A nurse entered 10 minutes later, tablet in hand, checking Alicia's vitals. When she looked up and saw me, her expression shifted, recognition and then deference. She paused, stood straighter, and walked directly to me. "Dr. Bernard," she said clearly, "I didn't realize you were already here. Chief Patel will be in shortly, but she'll want to loop you in on the treatment plan." My mother blinked. My father looked up, eyebrows rising. Alicia turned her head slowly, eyes narrowing, lips parting as if the pieces were clicking together too fast to keep up. "You're Chief of Trauma?" "Trauma consultant," I corrected gently. "At Brookfield." Silence. The kind of silence that wraps the room in static. When Chief Patel arrived, she addressed me with the same professional gravity. She outlined the magnesium sulfate protocol, asked for my concurrence on monitoring thresholds, and referred to me 3 times as Dr. Bernard before finally turning to the rest of the family. "I'll be back shortly to update you on her labs," she said, then nodded toward me. Thank you, doctor. It wasn't the first time I'd earned that kind of respect, but it was the first time my family witnessed it. Not through a screen, not as secondhand news. Right there, in person, undeniable. Alicia didn't speak until the room emptied again. She shifted her weight slightly, looking at me as though seeing a stranger. You never told us. I gave a small shrug. When have you ever wanted to hear? My mother looked away. My father cleared his throat. That's not fair, she said finally weakly. No, Alicia murmured. It's exactly fair. The words floated in the sterile air like a verdict no one wanted to deliver. Later, as Alicia rested and the nurses dimmed the lights, my mother pulled me aside. You built all this and we never knew. You never asked, I replied quietly. Her eyes welled. She tried to reach for my hand. I let her, but didn't hold on. We thought you were unhappy, she whispered. I was tired, not broken. She nodded slowly. I see that now. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning, Alicia's vitals were better. She was stable. The baby, too. And just before I left, she surprised me. Carrie, she said softly. I think I was jealous of you. For a long time. I raised an eyebrow. You built something real, she said. I was collecting likes. You were saving lives. She rubbed her belly, smiled faintly. I want my kid to grow up knowing that kind of strength. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. But something loosened in me, something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. We sat in silence after that. Not as rivals. Not even as sisters, exactly. Just two women who had both finally seen each other clearly. A week later, I returned to Brookfield, more focused than ever. The nurses welcomed me back like nothing had happened. But I moved differently now. Not to prove. Not to earn. Just to be. 3 months after that, I received news that sealed the chapter. The board had officially named me Chief of Trauma Operations, effective immediately. Again, the youngest in hospital history. I didn't call home to tell them. Instead, I walked out of the OR, stood alone in the staff elevator, and whispered to myself, "You're not too intense. You're right on time." The invitations were printed on thick cream cardstock with embossed lettering. Brookfield Medical Center Annual Honors Gala. Recognizing outstanding contributions in trauma medicine. Honoree, Dr. Carrie Bernard, Chief of Trauma Operations. I stared at it on my desk for almost 5 minutes before I picked up my phone and texted Alicia. Would you come? She replied 2 minutes later. Wouldn't miss it. Want me to bring mom and dad? I paused, then typed back. Yes. Let them see. The night of the gala, I wore a tailored black dress, no lab coat to hide behind, no clipboard to bury my nerves in. My hair was pinned up, my badge replaced with a nameplate at the head table. The ballroom shimmered with soft golden light. Waiters carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. A jazz quartet played near the stage. And every few minutes, someone tapped my shoulder. Dr. Bernard, thank you for everything you've done for this hospital. I heard about the Lakeside trauma case. Legendary work. My son wants to go into emergency medicine. He follows your work. Each compliment landed softly, like petals after a long storm. Then I saw them, my family, stepping into the room. Alicia looked elegant and calm beside Miles, who adjusted her shawl. My mother walked slowly, scanning the room as if she'd stepped into a world she didn't quite believe was real. My father trailed behind, stiff but quieter than usual. I didn't go to them. I let them take it in. Let them watch the board chair shake my hand and call me a trailblazer in trauma systems. Let them listen to the director of surgery describe my impact. Reduced mortality rates, improved protocols, mentorship that changed the culture of a once cynical department. Let them hear the applause. Not because I needed their validation, but because this moment belonged to the version of me they never bothered to know. Later, over coffee and quiet conversation, Alicia pulled me aside. You looked powerful up there, she said. I was. I think I always believed you were chasing something, you know? Proving a point. I smiled. I was. At first. But eventually I realized. I wasn't chasing. I was becoming. She nodded. You make me want to become too. That surprised me. But it didn't feel performative. It felt earned. My mother approached as the event wound down. Her posture hesitant, eyes soft. This was more than I expected. I know, We didn't mean to minimize all this. You decided early who I was, I said. And I stopped trying to change your mind. She winced. That's fair. There was a pause. Then she added, but you were always more than we imagined. I see that now. Thank you, I said. And I meant it, because I didn't need it, but it still felt good to hear. The next Sunday, I got a call from my dad. No sarcasm in his voice. No side comments. Just, I read that article about you in Modern Medicine. You sounded like a leader. I didn't reply right away. Then, thank you. I told a friend at church you were chief of trauma. He said, that's impressive. I told him he had no idea. That was his way of saying, I'm proud. I took it. Alicia had a baby boy 2 months later. She named him Lucas James Bernard Trenton. And on the day he was born, she texted, "Want to be godmother?" I stared at the message, heart twisting. I thought about the long years between us. The sharp words, the silences, the paper cuts that left scars. Then I typed back, yes, let's break the pattern. Now, when I walk through the halls of Brookfield Medical, people know my name. Students shadow me, notebooks open. Nurses check in with me before shift change. Patients ask, "Are you the Dr. Bernard?" But the most meaningful shift has nothing to do with titles. It's that I no longer feel the need to prove anything. Not to my parents. Not to my sister. Not even to the girl I used to be. The one who sat in the backyard staring at stars, promising herself she'd be undeniable one day. She is. And she's free now. You see, the greatest victory isn't being seen by others. It's seeing yourself and choosing to stand tall anyway. And if someone ever calls me too intense again, I'll smile, square my shoulders, and say, that's right. Intensity saves lives. That was my story. Some say I should have shouted louder. But real power doesn't beg to be noticed. It shows up in scrubs, makes the call, and saves the day. Would you have told them sooner, or let them find out like this? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the best clapback is a white coat and a title they never saw coming.